and welcome to Defeating the Feminist Frame, presented by myself, Professor Hamster, and my colleague, Mia. Defeating the Feminist Frame, the wage gap. Feminists will often bring up the wage gap as evidence of women's oppression by men. Those of us who are interested in auditing feminism's equality track record often argue the existence of the wage gap, or that its size is exaggerated, or what explains the wage gap. This approach, in my humble opinion, is futile. When you argue these points, you have allowed feminists to control the frame with an unproven premise. And when you allow feminists to frame the debate by accepting their unproven premises, you give them the ability to drag you into the reeds. You don't want to argue in the reeds because the reeds give sophists an advantage. They can simply hide their weak spots and exhaust you with the sheer volume of silly string they are capable of ejaculating. Instead, attack the unproven premise underlying the feminist wage gap argument. The unproven premise underlying the wage gap fallacy is that a wage gap is indicative of disenfranchisement in and of itself. This is a premise that has counterexamples throughout all of history. In many slave-owning cultures, slaves had freer access to occupations, including those we would consider white-collar today, such as scribe, doctor, and accountant, than their slave owners, and they had freer access by law. In those societies, slaves earned more than their owners, which, if you think about it, is common sense. Slaves are the ones doing productive labor in a slave-owning society, whereas slave owners earn their living via the productive labor of their slaves. Whether you count a wage in cotton picked or dollars earned, it's the same thing. One group is producing material wealth, the other is not. Therefore, the existence of a wage gap, or material wealth production gap, or picked cotton gap, is not evidence in and of itself of disenfranchisement. You also have to look at who the government decides to give those earnings to at the end of the day. It's not the existence of the wage gap that indicates disenfranchisement, but which group the government decides to take a wage from, and which group the government decides to give that wage to. You have now successfully challenged the feminist frame.